going to build upon what you've learned in the previous courses. So you learn how to make simple HTTP requests, have Flask handle that request, and you also learn how to do SQL queries and how to incorporate some of the SQL queries back into Flask. You also learn how to use session and post, which are two of the most important things that you have to understand to build web application. So now we're going to go into Django, and Django is called an MTV framework. And you can read some of the text below to understand why it is called that. So the basic implication of Django is that when the application is really simple and the application only serves, let's say, a dozen HTTP requests, you could have an application such as Flask handle all of that in a single file. But imagine that your application gets really, really complicated. You have hundreds or thousands of database tables. You have thousands of URL requests. You have thousands of HTML files. And imagine that you join a company and there are hundreds of developers working on this application. But there's not going to be a way for all hundreds of developers to all jump into a single file and make changes. I mean, you could technically do it, but it's not very smart because then you start overwriting each other files, even if you're using Git and so forth. So you will see why it's mandatory for all good developers to know how to use either an MVC framework or an MTV framework. Django works a little differently than many of the other frameworks out there. Some things are fantastic, some things are a little bit unintuitive, and it will require some learning curve. But that's very normal for someone who haven't done an MVC or an MTV framework. So just kind of expect that to happen. So the way that this course is going to be structured is in the first section, the Django intro section, you're going to learn about the HTTP request and how that is handled through the Django framework. And there are many ways to structure your Django app. We're going to do it one way, and we're going to ask you to repeat building your projects and applications in the way that we teach. Not that that's the only way to do it, but because it's pretty common and I think it's a good practice. So you're going to learn how to do routing, how to handle session data, post data, flash data, templates, and so forth. And that's basically the bulk of the Django intro section. Once the Django intro section is done, then you're going to learn what's called the object relational mapper. And I'll explain a little bit more when you get to that section what ORM is. But for right now, don't worry about it. Just focus on the HTML template. Focus on learning how Django works. It's going to be a little bit unintuitive, but after a little bit of time, you will get used to it. But just remember that although you're going to be building some simple apps, the reason we're going to create multiple folders and multiple files is to prepare you when you jump into a very complex application. Because most likely, if you're jumping into an enterprise app, it's not going to be built in the way that Flask is built. Flask, you can use it for simple apps, but when you're jumping into an enterprise application, you will see multiple folders all divided, and you will see the full power of object-oriented programming in dividing the work, separating the concerns within the framework. Okay, some tips is very common for students who get into their first MVC framework to be overwhelmed with all of the different files, because before there were maybe one or two files that you had to create or modify to make an application work. Now it could be anywhere from 10 to 20 files that you have to modify to even put a simple hello world on your web application. So it's a little annoying in the beginning. It's just something that you'll have to get used to. So, and you will. It will just take a little bit of time. There are some assignments that are a little bit repetitive from Flask, but it's just so that you can kind of repeat some of the things that you've learned and get familiar with Django. And then we added some new assignments to help you understand some of the security concerns and how you have to kind of think about how people pass data and how you can make your website more secure. So have fun, and I'll create some other videos for you to watch along the way.